Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along to witness our panel this afternoon as part of our Festival of Change at CQUniversity. To the people in the room here, to our panellists out the front, of course, and to the people who are watching us from wherever they might be. Please let me start, as is usual at CQUniversity, by acknowledging that we are meeting on the unceded lands of traditional owners, in this case in Mackay, the Yuribara people, and as always we acknowledge that they've been leaving footprints in the rich earth around our campus and making impacts on the waterways around our campus for many, many hundreds of generations. We pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We've got an interesting panel with interesting work that they've done in the social innovation space. We don't really know where today's conversation is going to go. It's going to be up to the people out the front. We're happy to go with the flow and to hear from you and to get a sense of what your journey has been in the social innovation space. What I might ask you all to do is to just go along the line, starting with Antoinette, perhaps, to give us your name, your organisation, and one thing that you think has been critical along your journey in this social innovation space. Antoinette, can you first?
I'm Antoinette from Mackay and Whitsunday community. I think in this journey of a social enterprise, becoming a social enterprise, it's been a very long journey, and it's just have to do the next step every time, not give up because the process is too big or there's too many things to do. It's just to do the next thing.
Okay, very good. I'm going to tease that out at quite a lot more length. Elisa, CQU alum, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Elisa Crooks, and our organisation is Millions in the Middle. I would say kind of the critical part has been linking with other like-minded people and people that want to create the same social change, because without that, it's really easy to get stuck or to not continue to move forward. So to actually find other people that want to come with you on the journey and fight the same fight has been really important.
Okay, as it happens, I have a question about that too later, so I'll come to you. Tammy.
Okay, so my name's Tammy Lewis. I'm from the incredible Tip Shop. We were a social enterprise when I first started, and it was very unfamiliar to me, so I didn't have a clue what that actually meant. But along the way, for the last 10 years, I've discovered that there are lots of like-minded people. We just don't know each other yet. And so we pride ourselves on giving people a hand up, not a handout. And that's pretty much it.
Very good, thanks, Tammy. Jeff?
Thanks, Rob. Jeff Stewart Harris, I'm the chair of Mackay and Whitsunday's Regional Development Australia. So that's a Commonwealth group. There's 56 RDAs across Australia, and we relate to and form the government of the regional development needs within the various regions. Because the Greater Whitsunday region is the areas of Isles and Whitsunday. And so we are a small organisation, but very much born out of regional collaboration with state, with local, and with other like-minded organisations. I guess my journey in this is I've had a local government career for over 30 years and a courts career for about 10, and understand the interactions with people and supply chains. And but in the early days of my local government career, local government functions were prescribed by the Local Government Act, and in the 90s that changed to be basically anything. And so that was a fundamental shift. And what happened then was that some of the early community development ethos that was in local government became a much more expansive thing. And the important bits of all of that were that the community development and economic development are often seen as two very different things, whereas they're two sides of one coin. You can't have one without the other. I guess that's the thing that very much drives my thinking in this whole social enterprise, social innovation, and social sustainability space.
And Kayleigh, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the journey that's brought you to your organisation.
Absolutely. So my name's Kayleigh. I'm from Australian Street Aid Project, and we're better known locally as CANCES. We're a Mackay-based homelessness organisation, and what we do, we bring people together who are experiencing primary homelessness, and we offer them 2 meals a day. And alongside that, there's various support services that we offer people. We've got a little drop-in lounge so they can do things like charge their phones, access support, have a chat. There's a kitchenette area where they can help themselves to tea and coffee. And while they're in there, our aim is always to try and connect them with other supports. So while the food might be the draw card, the idea is to help people to progress from their current situation, and that can really vary. We have a lot of people with chronic and complex multifaceted care needs. So quite often it's not just one issue, it's several issues combined, and that's where we really try to empower them to take action and make small changes and help themselves get into a better situation.
Very, very good. Thank you. Interesting themes to pick up there as well. So if I can come back to you, I do know that you are a CQ alum and had worked for CQU originally. So it was quite a career change to go to Millions in the Middle. Tell us a little bit about your thinking around that. You were on a particular path. What prompted you to change path?
So I went from working at CQUniversity in the marketing team here, and my transition was actually to community development and local government. So I did community development as my kind of day job. And Moons in the Middle is actually a project on the side of that. So from the community development kind of frameworks, it's that bringing together of people with similar challenges and actually working together to create whatever social change that requires or to break down whatever barriers that requires. So for us, it really stemmed from the fact that we've heard so many stories. Like every day, our Millions in the Middle is a housing-based social enterprise. So we're looking at trying to address the housing crisis that our community is currently in. So literally every day, and I've heard 2 or 3 more stories from before we came into this room today of people that are just really struggling to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. And we just don't have the housing diversity in our region. We just don't have the housing supply in our region. And, really we kind of got to the point where like we can't be hearing this massive need in our community and doing nothing about it. So yeah, it really just came from community need and from the overwhelming stories we're hearing every day from people that we were like, we can try something.
So what do you think it was about your own personality or your own background that made you go, no, I'm going to do something about this? Because we all know about the housing shortage. We all know people are doing it tough. We hear it all the time, but you've actually taken steps to do, to do something more active about that.
I believe in community-led change, and I believe in people's ability to make the change. We don't have to wait for, other people to come and save us. We're not waiting for government organisations. We're not waiting for external investors. We, within ourselves and as community and as people, have the skills and the ability to actually be a part of that process. So I guess, yeah, it comes from that core belief, and then obviously then finding other people that also share that belief that you can, I guess, work together to make a difference, or at least try to. And yeah, so I think that's the difference, to decide one day that, it's important.
I think there's a little bit of entrepreneurial involved here as well. I know Elisa and even what Kayleigh is doing. You need to have a little bit of entrepreneurial as part of you, it's part of your personality. It's like always look, where's the opportunities? What can I do about it?
That's actually really a good link, because we actually started at a split spaces startup weekend. So a sustainability startup weekend where Jenna and I both pitched very like housing kind of based ideas, and we kind of came together and worked on it through that. But yeah, so split spaces has also been a really good co-working and innovation hub in our region, which is based at the CQUni city campus, to really, get us off the ground and to kind of bring together people that, you're right, a little bit of the entrepreneurial, a little bit of the caring about the world, and caring about others, and kind of putting it together to.
Antoinette, why don't you keep going? I'll come to other members later. In terms of the communities,
So
GW
Greater
communities.
Whitsunday has been there since 1974, so they're close to 50 years old now. And it's always been government funded, but government has changed how they fund services. So we don't deliver a service, we do community development, which is very different from delivering a specific service.
Tease that out for us. What's the difference?
Well, service, oh my word. Service delivery is you doing something specifically. You do a disability service, you provide food, you assist with housing, you do something specifically. While we're doing community development, and that is really about uplifting or helping the community to be more resilient, for the community to be empowered to do things. So it's very vague what we do. It's not like we can say we've done 5 community development things today. We can't do that. So it's very vague, and the government really funds those things, those KPIs and things like that. So we are just at the stage where we have to find other funding to do what we do. And that is how the social enterprise, because if we can keep on doing what we do, we need to have funding. So the idea is to do people service work and then fund the community development work through that.
One of the things I do with the community development and social is like, it's the difference between giving someone a fish and teaching someone a fish. It's that kind of like old age analogy. If you just like provide a fish, yeah, great. But actually, okay, here's the skills that you actually need to do it. That's your community development that they can kind of do it themselves. And so we see the ripple effects of our community from the community development work.
As opposed to that
As
immediate
opposed to-
service delivery.
Yeah,
thing.
it's much easier to say we provided,
Yeah. 200 fish this week.
200 fish this week rather than like, okay, actually, if
I've
we
spent 10 hours training.
Yeah.
So no, that is, and so that's where we decided to start the social enterprise.
Yeah.
And trying, the things we do in our social enterprise is we deliver a service.
Yeah.
We do community engagement, we do training to get the money in, but that money helps us to do the other work.
Tammy, tell us about where your organisation, where Incredible fits in to that kind of pattern of activity.
Well, initially we started as recovering stuff from people going through to the tip and recovering stuff and saving the planet, keeping things from landfill.
Yeah.
And it was initially more on the disability sector. We had a lot of disabled people, but as we grew, much the same as Kayleigh, we discovered there were other people that needed help, and there was a lot of help out there for people with disabilities. So the disadvantaged people, the people who've come from prison, the people who haven't had a good start in life, giving them some skills to help them move on to different projects and different employment outside of where we are now.
Where did the inspiration for doing that come from, though? Because as you say, it started off, let's try and not put so much stuff in the ground. It's really quite in some ways, it's a bit of a leap. It was a leap, but it was there in front of us. We had these people wanting work, wanting to get back into the community. We have a community service project, through talking with those young fellows, people weren't giving them a go. Yeah. And they needed skills to get back into the community. And if they didn't have those skills, the chances were that they were going to go back to their old life of crime. Yep. So, in turn, it's win-win for them. Yeah. In some ways, you say it was right there in front of us, but sometimes joining the dots isn't that easy, is it? We tend to operate in silos.
Absolutely.
We see what's on the path in front of us.
And I think that connection, getting to know your team, getting to know, the obstacles that they're facing, and the same with the community service fellows, getting to know them. Some of those guys have got 100 hours. We get to know them pretty well.
Yeah.
And you see the obstacles that they're facing. And it's very, very easy without that support and connection to head back into their old way of life.
Yeah. As well as your RDA hat, Greater Whitsundays, you have a long history working in local government as well. Where do you see the role of local government, for example, in the sorts of activities that we see going on here? How much do you step in? How much do you just let 1,000 flowers bloom? That must be, you know, as a CEO of a local government organisation, 100 things come across your desk each week in terms of ideas, 100 problems come across your desk each week in terms of whether it's youth crime or homelessness or all of these kinds of things. Where do you see the role for local government in those sorts of activities?
Yeah, look, that's challenging because, as I said earlier in the introduction, the scope for local government is basically anything.
Yeah.
And so it's then about making sense of that. So you've got to have a really strong vision and values-driven paradigm. You've got to be very clear about what it is you're trying to achieve. And you've got to, you know, that then gives you the tools to be able to say no to the things that get in the way of the good things. But I'd like to pick up on what both Andrew and Elisa were saying, and that is that communities have huge untapped and often unrealised capabilities. And I think the challenge for local governments into the future is to be far more adept at developing and unpacking that and allowing it to evolve. Because, as they both said earlier, the more capability that can be developed and capacity being the scope of capability that can be developed within community, the less dependence there is on service delivery. And so I think the challenge is, and this challenge is paradox for sure, whether it's in the economic space, whether it's in the people space, whether it's in the environmental space, or in a more integrated fashion of all of those things, with the governance dimension and all that too, in an integrated sustainability model. So I think that the challenge for local governments for the future is to get far more sophisticated in terms of their thinking about unlocking capability. And in a lot of cases, that's a bit counterintuitive in the political process because you don't necessarily see results straight away. You don't necessarily see KPIs getting ticked off straight away. And it's that age-old debate of the difference between quantitative and qualitative research and quantitative and qualitative measurement. You need the numbers and you need the narrative and you need to be really good at tying them together. And I think they're the challenges that local government had. And I think there's a huge scope for growth in that level of sophistication in local government. And it's not necessarily endemic in the political process. So you need some greater souls within organisations who can sustain that journey and teach it, develop it, be change makers in a fairly non-threatening way, but at the same time, stay true to the course.
Thank you. Kayleigh, another CQ alum, I think you were a nursing student, is that
Yes.
right? So again, quite a change of direction for you in working into the Australian Street Aid project. Do you think it's getting easier to do the kind of work that you're now doing in the social innovation space, or do you think it's getting more crowded? Is it harder to get attention?
It is, so in a lot of ways, it is getting easier. I think social enterprises are becoming more recognised and being recognised as being a more valid solution. But in a lot of ways, it's also for us as an organisation, we come across different challenges as we grow. One of our biggest challenges is definitely space, and being community funded. We obviously have a really good balance of what's coming in and what's going out, so that we can remain sustainable as well. I think that our community is fantastic. We have Mackay. If I'd started this elsewhere, I don't believe that we would be where we are today. Mackay just has this really great sense of community, and if you put out there what you need, the community has a really magical way of making that happen. And I know that around homelessness particularly, there's been some negative connotations in the media recently, but as in general, our community is very open-minded, and I think that when I first started, a lot of people thought that maybe lost my marbles and includes some family members. So that's having to, I think one of the challenges when you first start is believing in yourself and your vision so much that anything else is not an option. That's for me, a lot of what I did was sort of in a way manifesting, because I believed in it so strongly that that not happening was not even an option in my mind. And that's, you can come across as a little bit
Obsessed,
yes,
perhaps.
but that's sort of what I believe is needed, and for me, it's helped me personally in so many ways. When I first started, I'm going off track from your question.
No, I'm loving it.
Yeah, but when I first started, and to this day, I have quite a few mental health problems myself, and I was in quite a dark place before I started this journey, and I haven't had a day that's been as dark as they were before since I started, because I feel like I've got purpose, and I've got drive, and I've got a direction, and that's what I'm trying to instill in the people who utilise our services as well, because no matter how complex your mental health is, you can use it to your advantage, I believe, and you can really make a difference in your community, and you can help other people make a difference.
And I guess part of what you're talking about there is empathy in a way, isn't it? That you, many of the people whom your service is working to help would share some of those same sorts of things that have been in your background too. So I guess that must also be something that that helps the work that you do, that capacity to empathise with the clients that you're helping.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really does. And they, even on their worst days when they don't see any value in themselves, myself and our team have all got a very aligned mindset, and we always see the value in that person. No matter what their mistakes, no matter what their life choices are, they can always get themselves to a better position. And I think that that's created a lot of very trusting relationships. Some of the people that we see have now been coming in daily for 4 years, and we might spend up to 6 hours a day with that person. And so the progress that's been made is amazing. A lot of people initially, when they very first present, eye contact's really difficult for them. Having a conversation is really difficult. They'll isolate. They're very mistrustful. Not sure what your motives are initially, and then after a while, once they realise that, hey, we're not asking anything of you, we just want you to be here and feel comfortable, their mindset changes, and then they'll start asking, they'll start telling you what they need and telling you their problems, and you can work on that person.
Does that kind of explanation resonate with any of the rest of you in terms of the clients that we have?
Absolutely.
So please tell us about that.
So much the same as Kayleigh. I fell upon my work. Basically, I had been married for 26 years, suddenly became single, didn't know there were all these services out there. So once I got into the position that I was aware that these services were out there, I wanted other people to know, other people who had been in my situation that didn't know. When you're sitting there and you don't have a clue where your next meal is going to come from or how you're going to support your children, and you've never been in that position before, it's really, really difficult. There's a lot of shame and there's a lot of guilt around it. So making people feel comfortable about talking to you has been probably one of my most important things that I want to share with everybody. And not to realise that there is help out there. Yeah, there's lots of help. We just need to make sure that we're connecting with the right people, giving the right advice, and things can improve for you. So that's been one of my main messages to everybody. Yeah.
That's been interesting, some of the conversation in the last few minutes, that Jeff touched on something that's very close to my heart, which is about the narrative, getting the story right. I was thinking about that probably as much as anything, about getting the story out to the outside world. But in fact, what you guys are saying, it's also part of having the story for your clients as well, because I guess there is an element of shame or awkwardness
Absolutely.
in accessing these services. And you've got to tell good stories to the people as well. Stories in the sense of not making stuff up, but in terms of saying, no, it's okay
It's
to
make
be in
them
this
feel comfortable
situation.
about telling their situation.
That's
I've
right.
been there myself.
Yeah. What do you think, in that sense, then, success looks like for the enterprises that you've been involved in? Would it be going out of business because you're not needed anymore?
Absolutely,
or-
that would definitely be the ultimate outcome. Yes.
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't think you're in trouble.
No, that's-
In the short term, do you see that there's going to be, are things getting better or worse in terms of the kinds of fields that you work in? That would be my question. And the follow-up question would be, if you're not really seeing light at the end of that tunnel, if it just seems to be getting harder, then how do you keep going? I guess that would be one of my questions. So, Lisa, have you got a thought about that?
I mean, probably from the research we've done, housing is going to get harder and harder in our community. You know, we've had a lot, like Jen is a building designer, and even the amount of houses which aren't being, new houses that aren't being drawn up and aren't being built or funded by the banks to be built. And just the time frame, the fact that it does take so long for, you know, there's external people coming in. But I think at the same time, it kind of means it's a more important thing to work towards, because it is something that will be a bigger issue. And for us, like, our role is not, you know, to take over Australian Street Aid or CASA or GIP in that kind of thing, like where we stand in the millions in the middle. It's, you know, not necessarily for that group of people and not for those that are comfortably affording their house, but it's for those millions in the middle that working for our community that are struggling to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. So we're also understanding that and the ripple effect that housing has on our community. And, you know, and it's not just those, as we've kind of heard, it's not just those that are traditionally vulnerable. You know, we've got a lot of people that are coming through our different services and offerings in our community. That's the very first time they've ever had to ask for a meal voucher, or it's the very first time they've ever had to see if they were even eligible for social housing. It's the very first time they've been in a really vulnerable situation. And we're seeing a lot of those. So,
Okay,
yeah.
that's really interesting. I guess what it's reinforcing is that very, in some ways, thin tightrope of being a successful and effective and productive member of our communities and our societies, and actually falling off that and what happens there.
But actually, a good point on that, the difference between being a social enterprise and like a business kind of setup, the benefit is that, you know, you're values driven, you're purpose driven. And so as the community needs change, so does how you respond to that. And so, of course, yes, like ideally we'd all like to be out of business, that we have no sort of issues, that everyone works in beautiful community development together. And of course, that's what we want. But, you know, it also being a social enterprise rather than a business where it's like we sell this or we do this, it actually allows that deep flexibility to be like, you know, these are our values, this is what we want to do. And like, be quite flexible with how to achieve that. So it does change over time and, you know, year on year with our community.
Antoinette?
I think what we also want is we want people who make use of our service to have that business for purpose as well. You know, when council needs to buy something and they buy it from a social enterprise, they're not just getting the service. There's also people getting jobs, there's a sustainable organisation, there's all these other things. So they're not just buying the service, they're getting a lot more. So that business purpose that I think that's where we want to go. When we spend our money, it's not just, you know, our money is going. Where is it going? Is it making life better for anybody?
Yeah.
And life, environment, you know, it's not just social; it's also environment.
Yeah.
Are we doing good with our money where we spend our money?
Audience, by the way, I'm going to come and shortly ask if you've got any questions. So for the people, so you've been warned. Jeff, in terms of the
the kinds of things that we've been talking there, and the need for flexibility and being able to pivot, I suppose, to use the jargon. How effective do you think government or semi-government organisations like the RDAs, like the local governments, are in being able to assist in those kinds of pivots?
Yeah, look, I think to some degree it's a function of size, and RDAs are fairly small organisations and are pretty nimble. But I think the answer to the question lies in understanding the need. And if you think about social sustainability, which is what we're talking about, by the way, there's at least 8 dimensions to that, so it's multi-dimensional. So things like people's way of life is part of it, people's health and well-being stuff. That's not just an absence of disease, that's about social, spiritual, physical, all of the dimensions of health and well-being, and environment and people's fears and aspirations. In fact, in that space. So what you'll find is that as needs get met in one space, people become more conscious of needs in some of those other dimensions. So I was going to add the insight earlier to say that these will have multiple thresholds and they'll change. And that's why it's important to be aware and across all of that, but also be able to be agile and adapt to that. So small organisations, I think, have the two-edged sword of flexibility, but they also type of resources. And so that's where it's important that there's not, in the broader ecosystem of all of these things going on, there's not duplication, there's not, multiple people trying to do the same thing. And my experience in this region for nearly 25 years now, I think the regional collaboration you see at the moment is as good as it's been over that time. I can remember times when the 3 councils were fighting amongst each other. I can remember times when state development people would be fighting with the councils and or RDA. At the moment, there's a great degree of alignment. And I think what that produces is an opportunity then for the right group to be doing the right things, trying to get, if you like, the most efficient use of those resources at that sort of much global. Look, I think there's a whole lot of other dimensions to these things, and it's from those few dimensions of social sustainability I mentioned, you start putting them into the context of development approvals, housing, and housing construction. You'll follow that there's lots of downstream impacts and effects, and I think a lot of our organisations in the past have been too focused on the immediate here and now impacts rather than some of those ongoing consequential impacts. And that, I guess, will be the hallmark of the sophistication of the region in time as we get much better at being able to not only see what's going to happen now, but what the potential knock-on effects and how we might anticipate those events.
Tammy, you seem to be nodding vigorously there.
Just on that, so I could probably give you a really good example. I have a gentleman that came to work for us. He actually came through community service. He then gained employment. He had 3 generations of social housing. Through working and having an income, he decided that he would get out into mainstream accommodation, which he did. So he left the housing commission area. He then, progressed, purchased a vehicle. Whilst he was on the settlement benefit, he had accumulated a lot of spur debt. Things were going great for him. He had a work, he had a house, he had a car, and then suddenly spur came to him and confiscated his vehicle. So what was he going to do? He couldn't get to work. So through my investigations and trying to help him out, which we did sort out, I discovered that here in Mackay there was nowhere for anyone to work off their spur debt. We have community service, and spur is a completely different thing. We thought it was one and the same. And so we are now registered to accommodate for people with a spur debt. They can come out and work their spur debt off with us. For someone who's got that debt over their head and they're going to come and take their vehicle, they haven't got a hope in hell of getting a job. So it's, that's that whole follow-on effect, So he now, he's very proud of himself. His children are proud of him. to me, it just warms my heart.
It's all that like ripple effect.
It
And then
is.
also, like, you know, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So if we can meet their basic needs of safety, shelter and food and that kind of thing, then you go to, you know, your connections and all the way through to self-actualization. So there's all that kind of support that can be developed through that. And so, you know, you hear what people can do.
Absolutely, and I have seen him talk to people who have come through that are, you know, living that life, and he said to them, it's not a great life to live, you know, pay your debts, make sure you do the right thing, because this is what can happen.
Yeah.
And so really being quite encouraging to people who are on the wrong side to get on board and behave, which is really lovely. Yeah, makes a difference.
Antoinette, why should people become change makers? Why should people enter the world of social innovation and the kinds of things that we've been talking about today?
It's the right thing to do.
Pretty much.
I think it's in, you know, some people, it's in yourself to do it. I think some people would never.
Yes.
They would always expect other people to do the good.
Yeah.
I think this housing crisis, it's not just Mackay-wide, that is worldwide. I think that makes a lot of people think how close we all are to needing support. You know, it's not just the people who can't afford housing. It can be anyone. So I think things like that almost makes us realise that, you know, we do need to do the good things and think about other people and how we can make it better for them.
Kayleigh, in the time since you really took a big change in your life direction to get involved with the Street Aid project, what's been the biggest surprise?
Oh, there've been a lot of surprises, but probably the biggest surprise for me would be the way I never expected to see us form such a community amongst the people that we're trying to help. That's been one of the most beneficial things that I never actually anticipated initially, how important that would be. And that's now probably the foundation of what we do. And you see people come in, they're having a coffee, they're having a chat, they're venting to each other or giving each other advice, and we don't interject when they're doing that. We let them, because it's just as good for the person who's helping as it is for the person who's receiving the help. It really instills some confidence into them and makes them feel good. Another surprise would definitely be how difficult it's been to create sustainability. And that's, again, we don't receive any ongoing funding. So each week we're having to, look at things very carefully. And we do have a really good stability at the moment for the social enterprise system, which makes that possible, which is our op shop. Initially, in those initial couple of years, there was a lot of challenges around that. We started out as with Chance's Cafe, and we were a cafe on Shakespeare Street, and we brought on young people experiencing homelessness of, well, any age, but majority of people were young, and we gave them training and employment. We helped them with accommodation, we helped them with some case management, and it was such an effective system, and it worked really well. And in that, we created some of the most loyal employees that you could ever wish for. There was a lot of challenges, and it might have been initially a lot more work than to put on somebody who's experienced and qualified for that role. But the outcome of that was just amazing. You got very, as Tammy, I'm sure,
Absolutely.
the people become very loyal to you and to your organisation, and you build a really good connection of bond. But unfortunately, then COVID hit, so we've had to be very adaptable. The cafe, wasn't sustainable at that time, and so the new model that we've created is, so I guess the having to pivot and change is a bit of a surprise as well for me, to have to adjust to, not only having to adjust to the internal factors and the needs of the people that you're trying to serve and help, you're also having to adjust to external factors, like COVID, for example. That's one. Yeah.
Anyone else want to have a go at that? Biggest surprise?
Biggest surprise would be the friends and the connections that I've made that probably in another lifetime I never would have made. That would be, yeah, definitely.
Look, it's interesting that you referenced that, and Kayleigh, I was taken with something that you said along the way. It's only in the last couple of weeks that we've heard media reports of research that shows what a terrible impact on the health outcomes loneliness is. And we've never had more people living in single person households in Australia than we have now. That seems to be one of the issues that's driving the housing shortage, is that lots and lots of people are living one person to a house. But it also is kind of as bad as being obese and smoking and drinking too much. It's interesting that you've talked about, both from a personal perspective, but also from the perspective of your clients, how important those connections and that networking and feeling part of something is to the success of the things that you're doing. Correct. Does that sound right, Elisa, for the work that you're doing as well?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, we find like isolation and but we're also finding it from the housing point of view, where we're literally, I was speaking to someone the other day, who's considering putting a secondary dwelling in their place, and her son, who's 25, lives in a house on his own, a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in Mackay, because that's all he could get.
Yeah.
So that's not, of course, like, it's very expensive for him to live there, but it's his only option.
Yeah.
And so, like, literally even just kind of creating other available spaces for smaller families to do. But we even know in our region that, there's like 2 bedrooms there in most households. And, and so it means that the housing is not all wasted.
Yeah.
Just something else, and this is not related to the housing stuff, but in terms of social enterprise and business doing good, what I find really surprising was, if you look at where social enterprises are, Mackay has been almost excluded. So if you go and look, you would see in Rockhampton there's quite a bit, in Emerald there's quite a bit, in Townsville there's like groups and established organisations. Well, in Mackay, up until a year ago, I think you must have been the only one here. And then Kayleigh came on board. So there's definitely, I think we had a group meeting the other day. We got like 10 organisations, 10 individuals together that's all trying to do this. So it's a very new concept in Mackay. And I think even if you go out to social procurement, people thinking, I'm going to have, I need food for my lunch meeting. You can get food from, for instance, Phoenix Place, which is a social enterprise where you are helping people to have jobs by buying food from them. So you're not just getting food, you're also giving jobs to people.
Definitely at that awareness stage.
Yes.
Social enterprise in our region. And as you kind of said, there's also that dividing council between like community development and economic development. So we support not-for-profits and charities like My Day Job, and then they support businesses, and who supports those that kind of float in the middle. So it is an interesting one in our region. Pretty much awareness stage.
Yeah, there's definitely a better awareness.
It's interesting. Why do you think we've been in that kind of rain shadow?
I think it's, if you look at the big picture, I think Mackay, Greater Whitsunday is a very wealthy area. It's going pretty well.
If you go back over this region, so for the last years, go back to the 70s, if I could have been the Northern Australia or Queensland International Airport, and the community chose not to at the time. And there are a whole lot of reasons for that. There was this notion that tourism would change us. So that was, I guess, something that happened. Then the whole mining thing came along and fundamentally changed the fabric of society almost by stealth. So, in fact, probably a more profound change. But all of those things have meant that there's been a significant wealth in the region that has been fairly easy to recognise, realise, develop, realise. And a lot of that effort then around economic development and around regional development is about more economy is good because it automatically makes the other things happen. It doesn't automatically make the other things happen. It can
Trickle
enable
down.
them, but it's not an automatic thing. And so I think that in some instances, policy development has tried to deal with those bits and pieces in isolation rather than trying to look at things on a system-wide basis. Yeah. And I think, Rob, not to underestimate what's being said about belonging and inclusion here, because at the end of the day, humans are a social species, and people want to belong, they want to belong to something. And it's really important to have these sorts of dialogues going on because they create awareness that create opportunities for belonging of like-minded people who didn't know about it before it happened. So it's that sort of, it's the Almadushi effect that both catalysed and sustained the Renaissance. And it's in our time. That's something that's happening. And the changes that are happening in society are happening much more quickly. So, we used to talk about Moore's law about the rate of getting additional transistors onto a chip. And that's almost now been surpassed, but it used to be every 18 months you double the numbers of transistors on a integrated circuit. And so you've got technology and change and things moving much, much more quickly. And what that does is it leaves the people at the margins behind much quicker. And if anything, the margins are getting bigger.
Yeah, no, I think that polarisation is a genuine issue. It's time for me to get inclusive about people in the audience. I threatened that you would have an opportunity to ask questions. Any questions for the panel from people sitting around there?
Absolutely.
Leanne.
Yeah. I'd like to ask a question to Antoinette. So, Antoinette, you're working with the Greater Whitsundays community. So we're a very large community. So that's, Hollandville, London, long way. So you build capacity through training. Can you talk to us about just maybe an example of what you do?
So an example would be a small not-for-profit organisation. As everything we've just been talking now, it's become really hard to get volunteers to do things. And often your volunteers are, your mum and dad. It's just everybody. They don't know how to run an organisation. So one of the things we do is governance, is to support organisations with governance, how to run an organisation. How are you going to think about strategically what needs to happen? Your members, what do you do about that? So typically that capability building is in communities and the organisations in communities to support them.
Any other questions?
Yeah, sure. I work over at the Conservatorium of Music, and we're really interested, obviously, how arts can contribute to social innovation. What would your advice or strategies be for the younger people? Because we're embedding social innovation projects into our curriculum. But what would your advice be for those young people to develop that mindset? What I hear today is that obviously your journeys evolve, and as experiences happen through life, you start to, like Elisa, you were talking about how your careers kind of change. But yeah, so for those young people, what would your advice be to develop those skills and mindsets?
Cherish the narrative. Cherish the narrative. Yeah.
And
bring that to your craft. Yeah.
And I don't know if that means the same, but being curious. It's. I think it's sometimes people forget to be curious. You just get everything. Everything is there. You don't. How did it get there? How did this happen? Why is this? I think almost learning to be curious all the time is one of the best things we can do.
Also, making sure they know that they have the permission and the power to do something. I think sometimes when I talk to groups of young people, they're like, we want to do this. And I'm like, excellent, do it. How can we actually work with you to achieve that goal? And so sometimes it's just being like, there's power within you and as a group, and you have the permission to actually try something and to work towards trying to change or add this into your day-to-day life.
And maybe following on from that, I guess, is permission to fail as
Yeah,
well.
totally.
You don't have to wait until you've got all of the pieces in a in
Well,
order and the
and actually,
loan from the bank and whatever else.
and actually don't wait for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Like actually actively start before you're fully ready and before everything's aligned and pivot
That
and
is
change
probably
and
the
link up.
best.
Like
Yeah.
honestly, I feel like, you know,
If you get more, the more you start to think about things, the harder it gets, and you'll never do it
Yeah.
because there'll always be another reason why you're not ready to do it. I was listening to something the other day and say, just run before you walk.
Yeah.
You just need to do it.
Yeah.
Sort of like fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
In a way. Yes. And that's not to say go doing anything unethical, but just I think you have to just choose to take those steps, even when you're not sure of exactly what the outcome will be. There's always going to be obstacles and hurdles in your way, no matter what you do, and deal with them as they come. Having a group of really supportive people around you to help to especially people. So most social enterprises and not-for-profits have a board, and having a really solid board is key, I think, and that's something that I've learned along the journey. And in regards to how do you open people's minds to it, I think things like this are fantastic because they're educating people that this is an option. Back when, even up until probably 6 months into opening the cafe, I hadn't heard of a social enterprise. And somebody said to me that we were one, and I sort of went, oh, are we? So, in schools and universities, just telling people, students and future, possible future entrepreneurs that this is an option and that you can do good and you can do what you love at the same time, and you can do it in a way that is very beneficial for yourself, for the community, and for the people.
We perfectly segued onto what my last question was going to be, which is how do you start? And we've already actually been doing that. Elisa, any other comments from you about how you start, other than it sounds like just start?
yeah. Well, it's linking the right people together that also have the same kind of either, gap that they see or the same drive to kind of come together. So yeah, bring a few people together and start, honestly. Yeah. And places like Split Spaces, I think, is a good kind of like meeting point, or like going to stuff like this, or going to different gatherings like this, or social enterprise gatherings and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Tammy?
Same networking.
Yep.
Knowing what's available.
Yeah.
Finding your people.
Yeah. Yeah, finding the trial.
Yeah.
But perhaps not knowing too much.
Yeah.
Jeff, any final thoughts about getting things started?
Yeah, Rob, you and I both share the fact that in our respective roles, Pierre Filion was our predecessor, and I have huge respect for him in the work that he did to bring social innovation to CQU, and particularly around the CQU network of universities around the world. And this morning, in preparation for this, I had a look at that website, Ashoka U, and came across the handbook for changemakers. And I feel as though I've been an accidental change maker. I think probably for the first 25 years of my career, I was probably doing bits of it without necessarily thinking I was doing it, and I've been more conscious about it since then. But the mindsets that they talk about being the quality mindsets for change makers are to be firstly identifying as one, and I think the thing around the arts is just absolutely right for that.
Yep.
Self-awareness, empathy, inclusivity, and perseverance are the things that we've heard from everyone. So, the more personal some of this is, the more universal I think we find.
Thank you. And that sounds like, oh, yes,
Sorry,
okay.
yeah.
Here, yes, a 1 minute question.
1 minute question. Antoine, I think you said you need to have an entrepreneurial spirit to start a social enterprise. If anybody can answer the question, anybody who starts an enterprise knows how hard it is. It takes a lot of effort, but you're adding an extra layer by making it a social enterprise. Anybody want to explain what they see as an advantage for you as starting a social enterprise, or a disadvantage of starting a social enterprise? Because there is advantages and disadvantages.
While others are thinking about it, I'll stab at this. Look, from an entrepreneurial training point of view, there's a really good MOOC, one of those massive online courses that MIT run. out of the same management school. And they're quite well accredited for it, and they actually take that to a whole lot of different countries as the learning and development for both for profit and not for profit social enterprises. So there's some really good training available. It's free, and that's an important first point. I think some of the advantages of the social enterprise are that it's much more easy to win the hearts and minds of like-minded people when they know it's not for you, and that it's got an inclusive and a more eclectic ethos to it. The other side of it is that, the for-profit type things foster disciplines that are the music to the ears of bankers and insurers and people like that you need to be able to partner with along the way as well. So being able to develop some capability in all of those things is probably going to add some success factors to starting a not-for-profit or a social enterprise. But there's some great support around it as well.
All right, I'm afraid I'm going to have to pull the pin there. I'm sure that we could talk for another 2 hours and there ain't trouble at all. But let me thank the audience members for coming along today, online and here. Your interest is certainly what makes it worthwhile doing these kinds of things. I think universities are a place that can foster these kinds of conversations. It's one of the things that we do. We're kind of like a Switzerland. We're neutral territory for having these kinds of conversations, and I think we should do it as much as we can, as often as we can. Will you please join with me in thanking our panel today, Jeff, Tammy, Elisa, Antoinette, Kayleigh, for their time and their Of course, everyone is welcome to come and join us for something to eat now. Please do so.